Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Kratz. I am thrilled you are here with us today. Our purpose is to share stories, ideas, and tools to help you on your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome, listeners. I have a friend, ally, and just an amazing human for you today on today's show. Turquoise Peart is a DEI practitioner based in Chicago and focused on inclusivity in the broader collective. She was born and raised in the South and has a Caribbean American upbringing as well. So this all sparked a deep awareness as to the unique differences of those around her, but ultimately what unites us as well. Her mission in the DEI work is to build spiritual places and use awareness and resources to unite local communities regardless of their DEI dimension, including sexual identity, culture, race, neurodiversity, and more. Turquoise, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Julie. It's so good to connect with you again.
Yeah, well, I know we've had many conversations over the years, especially we're in more corporate space, but now you're out on your own as a practitioner. And I just love for you to just quickly share your story or journey into the DEI space and what you're up to now.
Of course, of course. I mean, it's interesting how it all works, right? Everything is connected. I remember moving to South Florida. So I was born and raised there, but we moved to a small town in Fort Lauderdale. And if you're in the area, you probably know it as Weston, Florida. And that's an important detail to mention because, we were the only Black family. And I remember that. I specifically remember standing on the street one day and just kind of, it was a thought, but I remember thinking, I want to have friends from different backgrounds. And it was my 7-year-old mind. And lo and behold, I would actually over the years move into not only human resources, which is how I got my start, but just this love for people and diversity. I mean, meeting people from different backgrounds. That's kind of how it all started for me. I've always been a people person. But more recently, I think just post George Floyd, and I know that things have since shifted quite a bit, just this burning desire to see humanity succeed, whatever that looks like, whether it's from, being raised in a certain community like I was, or someone that wasn't given access to equitable opportunities, or someone in the neurodivergent space or accessibility, whatever it is, like, I just want to see people be successful. And most recently, what I've been up to is, just kind of launching out right into a space that is a little more faith focused. So, what I mean by that is really seeing faith-based organizations and individuals embrace this idea of inclusivity. So, I grew up in the church, and I've noticed that just with this movement and the wave of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the corporate space, it seems to be, not as received as we'd like, but it's a little more talked about. But in the church, not so much. And so most recently, I've begun, speaking to faith leaders, faith organizations about how do we see, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility in the spaces and communities that you operate in. So that's a little bit about what I've been up to, Julie.
Well, I can imagine that's a challenging space. I know that's something that we've talked about over the years on the podcast, and it certainly comes up in my work, this seemingly conflict between religious or spiritual beliefs and the DEI space. So I wonder, Turquoise, like, how do you square that? If somebody says my
Mhm.
religious beliefs aren't aligned with diversity work, which I always struggle with, and I'm sure you do too. But maybe like unpack that for us. Like why do people have that perception and how do we tease that out?
Right, right. It's that thought of, the separation of church and state. I think to start, we kind of like to compartmentalize our lives in general as people. But what post-COVID taught us is that our lives are going to be a mesh of many things. And if you want to bring your full self to work, that includes bringing your religious self, your yogi self, if you're a mom, a wife, a partner, whatever it is, um, bringing that to the spaces that you operate in. And I think in the faith-based world, we haven't quite caught up to that trajectory yet. Even during the COVID series, there are actually still churches that are still, masking, and they haven't quite like fully opened up. And so I think there's a little bit of a lag for that reason, to answer your question. And also, I think that in general, the perception is that we're not really inclusive people. So, for example, what I mean by that is, let's say you're Catholic. Typically in your space, your church, you're going to have other Catholics that are practicing. And it's the same for other religions. So I think the thought process is that if you don't sound like that denomination, or if you don't dress or look or match up to the thought process or stereotype of that group, then the thought process is you're not going to really be accepted. And how do we begin to break that down? Well, I really believe what we're doing today, Julie, is the answer. Like, just having raw conversations. So I've started that actually with different people. I have a community that I built 13 years ago, social media community on Instagram. And I just start with just basic conversation. And we don't even need to be in the same faith, for example, but just, what are some of the issues that we're tackling? So, for example, this is the month of June, and we are, really spotlighting, we should be all the time, but we are really focused in on the LGBTQIA plus community. And so what does the church feel about that? And I'm having conversations with various people about that offline, and really beginning to normalize these conversations, because we really should not shy away from it. One little tidbit I'll share before pausing is, if we look at leaders or even spiritual figures, like let's say Jesus, for example, he loved all people. He sat with all people. He talked to all people. He sought them out. And I really think that that's the missing component for the church and any faith-based leader. The message should be, we are looking to reach all people. And then, of course, whatever you stand for, that should be made known to your congregants, your communities, and those that are in your sphere. Does that all sound
Oh
conclusive?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that's my understanding as well. And admittedly, I don't practice a certain denomination. I think for the very reasons you just explained. It's like, well, I want to honor everyone else has, that's their thing. Like that's your beliefs. I don't want to taint that. I don't want to force that. I don't want to
Mhm.
feel forced into something that if you don't believe this, this is going to happen to you. That just it never resonated with me as a child. And as you're talking turquoise, I had a very religious mother that would read the Bible frequently. I mean, during my childhood, I was forced to go to church, and much to my chagrin. And as I grew older, I just resisted
Mhm.
that. And I'm not saying that's a path I'm proud of, or just I can understand how people find their own ways to practice spirituality. And really, when I think about DEI work, when I get that pushback, I try to be curious and inquisitive, much like you explained, of like, oh, help me understand, like what's in conflict with your religious beliefs. And often there's a misunderstanding about DEI, like you said, being political or being, this
Right.
really poles. People go to the extremes with this, and try to reset as like it's about fairness, it's about respect, it's about creating a place where people feel seen, they feel heard, they feel a sense of belonging, as you and I both know.
Right.
So how do we create space? And that's what I'm wondering about. It's Pride Month, or at this point of the episode airing, it's halfway through Pride Month, and
Right.
you and I are both not in the LGBTQ plus community, as it's defined today. I wouldn't, say that I'm a member of the community, but I would say I'm hoping to be an ally to the community. I
Mhm.
wonder, Turquoise, I know a lot of your work focuses on the intersection of that, how to be inclusive to LGBTQ plus, especially youth at a time when there's unprecedented discrimination and legal action being taken place. I
Mhm.
wonder, how did you find your path to wanting to be an ally specifically around this dimension of diversity? And, help our listeners understand how they can show up as allies too.
Right, right. It just kind of dawned on me, right, with the recent legislation that we've been seeing, and whether it's in the transgender space or what have you, it really dawned on me that the church really has not taken a stance at all. And that is very concerning to me because let's say that you are a parent or a guardian of someone in the community, you want to make sure that they have access to resources, right? Obviously, everyone's entitled to their own beliefs, and I wholeheartedly believe in that. And I'm sorry that you grew up in an environment where it was forced. I really believe that this should be something that um, you're given exposure to, but you have a choice and you have freedom to express and be. That's so important. And so when I saw that disparity there in the church, and I even tested it out just to see, I reached out to a local church here, a church that I attended at the time, and I inquired. I said, on your website, I noticed that you have, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion listed. What have you done? Fill me in. And they basically said that they offered training to all of their staff back in 2021, which was great. But since that time, they had not done anything recent. And they, of course, was the round robin for me where they moved me from person to person, and said, chat with this pastor, chat with that pastor. I think I got to like three different pastors, and actually, till this day, still have not gotten a response back or an email back on that. And what I'm trying to say is that that really saddened me because it made me realize that, let's say I was in the LGBTQIA plus community, what resources do I even have? How do I even go about navigating that? And worse, if I'm a parent or guardian of someone, um, I, it's and you're deeply religious or spiritual, how do you navigate? So that was a problem that I noticed, and so my goal was to provide the solution or help to start these organizations or faith-based groups to start that solution process. So that's where that growth and idea came from. And then how to navigate that, what I would say, if you're someone in the space, is that, or how to be an ally rather, is again, these are human beings first and foremost. We're all human beings, and that's how I choose to look at it. Being an ally can just be really developing a curiosity for anybody and anything. And I think if you allow yourself to just be curious about the world around you, you're genuinely being an ally and you're showing up. So when you do come across people that don't look like you necessarily, or aren't from the same background, or may not necessarily identify as you do in any of the other DEI dimensions, you already have that innate curiosity within you that's been predispositioned for you to just be open and be accepting. um, I
Yeah.
really think that's how it starts. Also, I would say, if you do meet someone, ask them the question, tell me more, share with me your experience. And I think that really begins to open the door to showing up and being an ally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think asking about people's families, their weekends, you don't have to get intrusive with,
Right,
all of the details of things. I love the kind of flip it to test it model with this of like, hey, if you wouldn't ask that to a straight person, probably don't ask it to somebody in the community or
exactly.
someone that's trans, probably wouldn't ask a cisgender person that. So, just be mindful of the kind of questions you're asking, but showing a curiosity to wanting to get someone to know someone as a full human. And I think turquoise, there's a misperception too about allies sometimes. And I see this when, we go to our local pride parade every year. And again, we want to celebrate this year round. But I see this as like, oh, you must be closeted, or like there must be something with you, or you have like a close family member. That's the only reason you'd care. And, more
Right,
often I see tons of allies are just like you said, like, I'm about humans, and these people are humans and they deserve to love whoever they want, have their gender identity and gender expression match. Like,
right.
this is just a human need, really. And I certainly feel that way about it. But I think sometimes the fear of like, I know for my husband, my partner, he won't go to the pride parade because he's afraid that someone's going to think that he is in the community. And it's like, no
Right.
one's thinking that, right? But it
Right.
prevents the best of allies that I know him to be super inclusive and very much supportive of LGBTQ plus, right? But it keeps him away from the conversation out of fear of his own, protecting of his masculinity, which I just think is interesting.
Hmm.
Um, so I wonder, you mentioned the legislation, record number of things happening, especially in your home state of Florida. But we shouldn't, there's, 15 states that have been aggressive with us, and that very much has been the blueprint of this. So we're at the threshold of like really dark times in the community. I
Right.
wonder, Turquoise,
Right.
like for people that feel overwhelmed, I know I feel overwhelmed. Like, what my home state of Indiana, we're not being very inclusive for especially transgender folks right now with gender affirming care. Like,
Right.
how do we show up? Like, what it feels like you just like turn on the news, like, oh no, what's going on at Target? Like, what's going on at Bud Light? Like, why?
Exactly.
What do I do other than boycott brands? Which I certainly they're going to run out of things to boycott at some point. But
Right.
what do you
Exactly.
think about that, Turquoise?
Well, I actually want to go back to that thought that you just brought up and then answer that question. That's such a good switch over. I love that transition. Just a quick thought about the intersectionality and your partner. In my journey where I thought, I can't I can't be a Christian, or I can't believe, in the things that I believe in the religious space and be an ally for these different groups of people. And boy, was I wrong. I mean, there's been such a journey there. And I would say to anyone listening, you can hold space for different communities of people and still honor yourself and honor your faith, or honor yoga, or whatever it is you align to. So I just wanted to bring that up because that is such an interesting part. And I think in this journey as a practitioner, it's something that we often overlook, because for some listening, you hold different spaces and intersectionalities. You might be a mom, a dad, a wife, whatever it is. Those are all intersectionalities. So there's nothing wrong with that at all. And then as far as like the legislation pieces, um, and how we tackle that, I think really what it boils down to is really understanding that, showing up for these communities look different for different people. Like I will say, going back to George Floyd, I was not one of the ones that were out there protesting. That was not my role. But I was able to hold space in a different way. So I think that what I would say is like, what are different ways that you can be an ally for a community? In this case, the LGBTQ, like identify what those are, and then find a pathway that aligns to you in the best way possible. So some people are just not vocal. So maybe a protest or that kind of thing may not work, or some people are better at writing their thoughts, so maybe social media might be a better way to engage. Those are just some ideas that I would like to kind of put out. What do you think, Julie?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, you got to find your speed, find your lane. I very much felt the same the summer of 2020. I didn't feel protesting was not my form of social justice and allyship,
Right.
but social media was. And obviously, having talks with folks in corporate settings and community settings was. So I think sometimes we feel the weight and the pressure. And this is like perfectionism that comes with allyship that's just so
Right.
unrealistic. And honestly, if you're trying to show up perfect, you're going to probably show up a little weird and off anyway. Like, hi, I'm here to help. Like, that's not how allyship works. It's just, hey, one of my favorite questions is just when you get to know somebody is like, what does
Uh,
support look like for you?
right.
Or, hey, if I wanted to be more of an ally, and support Pride year round, what might be some things I should do better or consider doing less of or more of? And
Right.
I've asked this question so many times over the years, and it always goes back to education and advocacy. Always educate yourself, share that knowledge with others,
Right.
and then advocate in the spaces that you have some influence over, whether that's where you shop, how you talk to your kids, I think is so important. And if you don't have kids, young people in your lives, like,
Right.
wow, I mean, you're going to learn so much too. So it's a progress over perfection. I think we need to embrace in this space. Turquoise, tell our listeners though more what you're doing with your business. I'd love, this intersection of religion and all the other dimensions you want to support as somebody that wants to be an ally to other communities. Tell us about your work.
Right, right. So I'm actually Inspirational Mecca. So if you want to take a look, that is the company that I am spearheading and that I've been, working on more specifically around the inclusivity and spiritual faith-based space as of late. But what I'm focused on is really starting with how do we identify, preliminarily, what are the areas that you can do better in as a faith-based organization? So whether that's diversity, whether it's the inclusivity pieces, whether it's accessibility, we start with just a quick identification of that. You can actually have a strategy call with me where I talk to you more about how do we develop a strategy based on the current climate of your organization or your faith-based space. And then from there, I actually help you to facilitate different trainings and different opportunities, whether that's speaking engagements, conferences that you offer. That's where I come in and really humanize this experience. I've, as of late, I've been connecting with local therapists and practitioners here, specifically in Chicago, because I know you have to be licensed by state. So I'm just starting locally where I am, but my vision is to hopefully expand that in the years to come. But essentially working with therapists that, like, let's say you're an organization, doesn't matter how small or large you are in the faith-based space, that we can outsource that need to. So let's say you have a congregation of, like 500 and maybe 5% of that are in the LGBTQ space, let's say. I work with therapists that specialize in certain sexual traumas and certain things that can directly relate to that community. And you can have on-site support to help your congregants navigate those conversations. And really, there is no, I would say, overall goal there other than just normalizing conversations surrounding how people in the space show up. So those are just a few of the things I'm doing to really help to just see a little more progress. And as you know, Julie, this will take time. I just moved into the space recently, I would say in about the earlier spring in 2023, because I saw the need. And I feel like as the months roll on, as we move closer to 2024 and the presidential election and things like that, we're going to see tighter legislation and conversations surrounding this. And I want to see faith-based leaders and organizations be successful. I'm even chatting with ERGs, which are employee resource groups, because companies are starting to look at that component where you have faith in the workplace. So I'm looking at, how we can even begin to sprinkle some of that into the conversation, even in the corporate spaces as well. So that's a little bit about my
So
off.
cool. So cool. Well, we'll be sure to link to your LinkedIn. I know you're working on your website right now. So when that's ready, folks need to connect with Turquoise on LinkedIn and follow her there for now. But it's really cool what you're doing. And you're right. I mean, 2024 is going to be a wild year with everything
Exactly.
going on. It's just, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful we'll settle in at some point, but it's definitely going to be a turbulent next few years, I think, if we're realistic allies. And that's why our voices really matter. And, I think your story is inspirational for our listeners of you see something and it's not right. Like you don't have to remain powerless, right? You don't have to stay stationary just because maybe that's how you grew up or you don't know what the next thing is to do. And I'd encourage listeners, knowing this is Pride Month, one piece of education I just took part in was reading the book, The Savvy Ally. Um, and it's a wonderful book. It's in its second edition, so it's been updated with a lot of the current issues that we've been talking about today. And so I just offer that up, listeners. The proceeds for the first year are going to organizations that are supporting LGBTQ plus youth and pride. And so just know that's a form of allyship I think everyone could take. So just offering that up. And I'd say there's some fascinating documentaries out there about the Stonewall riots. Stonewall Uprising is a great one, as well as Disclosure that Laverne Cox produced with Netflix. So just a couple other educational points that maybe you can watch as a family or watch independently and share what you learned with others. And we also have a webinar actually on the date this is airing. It'll be tomorrow, June 15th, and we'll be recording it. So if you missed that, just drop me a note and I'm happy to share more on LGBTQ awareness, community support, how to be an ally. So just some resources, listeners, to check out. Turquoise, it's been wonderful to be with you today. Anything we did not discuss that you were hoping to share in the conversation?
This was so good. Thanks for having me, Julie. Honestly, I'm excited to, kind of see what comments come through because, like I said, that intersectionality piece for me was so eye-opening and so enlightening. And I hope that folks that listen really take that away from this conversation, that it's okay. It's okay to hold space. It's okay to be who you are and support humankind, which is really what I hope resonated. But I think we covered it all. Well done.
Thank you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Of course. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you liked what you heard, consider hiring Julie and the Next Pivot Point team to come speak at your organization's next event. We speak on a range of topics from active allyship to inclusive leadership to how to create a culture where everyone feels seen, heard, and feels a sense of belonging. Thank you for being on this journey with us. Go to nextpivotpoint.com to learn more.